Addiction levels worldwide are perhaps at their highest level ever, whether it's drugs, gambling, alcohol, even pornography. Addiction is a widespread problem that generally has more questions than answers. Dr. Gregg Jantz is a psychologist and best-selling author. His latest book is called Healing the Scars of Addiction. Welcome back to Bridge City News, Doctor.
Good to be with you today. And yes, addictions are growing at rapid rates.
Now, how are addictions different today as opposed to maybe 20, 30, or 40 years ago?
We usually think of, well, alcohol's an addiction, and that's true. And a lot of focus has been put on alcohol. But now, with the emergence of technology, I mean, what are we seeing with, for example, digital addiction? And in our families, with digital issues came pornography. And we need to mention that pornography or sexual addiction continuing to grow. So we have more opportunities, I believe, to become addicted than ever before.
And do you think some people also have addictive personalities? So they maybe conquer one addiction, but they move on to something else?
Well, we live in an age of what I'll call stimulus seeking. There's a lot of stimuli. And so we have an opportunity, those of us that really enjoy that and having a lot of stimuli, doing a lot of things, and that certainly would be me. We have to be careful because if we can step off the wrong lane. So yeah, I think there's personality factors that can set us up. We know, for example, with alcohol, there's definitely a genetic tendency, but there's a lot of factors that add up to what equals an addiction. But we just have more addictions now than ever before.
So, doctor, why do you say that addiction creates so many questions?
Well, because there's many different reasons that we may start an addiction. Some people have misjudged addiction. They go, well, it's a character flaw. It's something wrong with you. And there's a lot of misunderstandings or misjudgments around this whole topic of addiction. Take the opiate addiction, for example. That's an accidental addiction for most people. They're prescribed a pain pill, and before they know it, they're addicted. Never intended to become an addict. So we need to remember there are ways that we journey into addictive behaviors that we never intended to and can get a real stronghold in our life.
You say that addiction does not go away on its own. How do people really overcome their addictions?
Well, we've been doing this now 34 years, and I work with individuals literally from all over internationally. And one of the things that we know about addiction is it's a ticking time bomb. And what I mean by that is something will eventually break. We try to keep it secret. If it's pornography, we say, well, it's not hurting anybody. I can stop anytime. Or we even say that with alcohol. But over time, that secret and that isolation that we're living, something breaks. We get found out. Our physical body, if it's an addiction, a chemical addiction, something happens. And so I always say addictions are a ticking time bomb that will eventually go off.
So I guess maybe what you have to do to prevent bringing on a lot of these addictions or becoming addicted to something is, like Mom says, everything in moderation perhaps, or maybe if you know you're going down the wrong path, turn right or turn left, take another path.
We do have to have what I'll call guardrails and understand where's my sensitive points, where's my vulnerabilities, and build in protection. For example, maybe a person realizes, you know what, I struggled with alcohol. I'm no longer doing that. I'm living a clean life. But then maybe you start to realize I'm going through a stressful period in my life. And suddenly you start having these tendencies to want to use again. You go, oh, I'm not going to use alcohol. But maybe you turn to something else.
Cigarettes.
So it could be.
Right.
And we can put a lot of things in, digital addiction, just escaping away in the internet. But because we're looking for something, here's the key, to mood alter. I want to change my mood. I want to change how I feel. And so I'll look for something to do that.
How about an accountability partner? Somebody keep you in check. How important is that?
Well, I think, we hear the term sponsor, we hear the term, really, it's a person that we can trust to let them know, hey, I've got a vulnerability or I'm struggling. It's somebody, first of all, that'll tell us the truth. And secondly, they do it without shame or judgment, but they're there to be of help. You know what? We all need people like that in our lives. Sometimes we call them mentors. We all need somebody in our life that fulfills that role.
Now, you bring up statistics talking about 64% of Christian men have viewed pornography in the last month. Why is it such a huge problem within the church?
Well, I think one of the reasons is a huge problem is there's accessibility, and there could be maybe there's some marital issues, or maybe there's some issues in a person's life that's setting up that vulnerability. And we work a fair amount with men who come to see us, and this is an issue. One of the things that we find is, a person may say, I never thought I'd ever go this far, go this deep, because they started a pattern. And so that's what we're looking for. We're looking for, has a pattern started? And it's easy to start a pornography pattern because I can be so secret about it. And there's still a lot of guilt and shame. But I also set up these thoughts in my mind as, well, I'm really not hurting anybody. And we start to set up a system of denial and rationalization. And that's what addiction does.
So, how do childhood survival strategies metastasize into addictions in adulthood?
Okay, that's a big question. Here's what I'm thinking. If you've got childhood trauma, that childhood trauma uh, creates emotional pain that in some way I'm going to look, how can I deal with it? I've been hurt, I've been emotionally abused, physically abused, sexually abused, but there's been something that's been traumatic. And I want to feel differently. I want to escape from that pain. So this is why we've got oftentimes 16, 17-year-old individuals who maybe start using cannabis or pot. They're just looking to mood alter. I got to feel differently. I don't like my situation. And then before you know it, that's controlling them. And so, nobody starts off to say, hey, I'm going to be an addict. That's not a term we want to put on ourselves, but that's what ends up happening. And I just got to say that we're seeing such an increase that I'm so glad we can talk about this today.
Would you say that stress is also a contributing factor? That's why people are looking for some sort of escapism as well?
I would say repeated stress. We all have seasons of stress, all of us do. But if we have repeated stress over and over and over, another word for that might be chronic stress. And there's nothing, I can't get away from this. Maybe it's an employer or a boss, or maybe it's a marriage. But there's repeated chronic stress, and it's like there's no escape. So I'm going to create my own internal escape. And that's usually through addictive behavior.
Mine's pumpkin pie, but we'll save that conversation for another time.
Pumpkin pie. We'll talk about that next time.
Yeah. You write that addictions, like abusers, actually take control. How do we stop them?
Well, the control that happens is due to the denial and the rationalization. It's that saying, I can stop this anytime, or this is no big deal. I'll stop next weekend. And we start telling ourselves lies. So that's a sign that it's got control of us. It's a repeated pattern. I'm lying to myself, and I'm continuing to use despite the consequences. So how do we got to make a decision. And for some, it could be today. A decision is, I am going to ask for help. Addictions don't recover in silence or isolation. And so for some, it may be, I'm going to do the first step. I don't want to go this whole year letting an addiction be progressive and taking me down a path I really don't want to go. So it's a decision to get some help.
And that first point, I guess, is admitting that you have an addiction, right?
Well, it may be admitting, hey, this is not working. I know I need help. If I continue doing this, where is it going to take me? And really, when I say help, I need to ask for the right kind of help. It doesn't mean necessarily I'm going to go to my best friend and say, will you help me? No, we got to go to a situation or a person or an organization that knows how to help. It's like going to the right surgeon. Go to the ones that really know how to help you, that understand what's going on. And I got to tell you, there is hope for this, no matter what the addiction is.
You devote an entire chapter to consequences of addiction, Doctor. What are some of these consequences? Maybe, like you mentioned earlier, you lose your marriage, maybe you lose a job.
One of the consequences early on is it isolates us from other people, generally speaking, and it destroys intimacy. In other words, I'd rather be with my substance or my chemical or my alcohol, whatever it is. I end up wanting to be with that instead of with people. So I'm more intimate. We haven't mentioned it yet, but food could be an addiction. So I'm more intimate with these substances than I am with people. So it robs intimacy. And physically, there's always a consequence. We're learning more and more about what addiction does to our brain, what addiction or alcohol does even in our digestive tract and the depletion of nutrients. We're learning more and more that addiction has some very real physical complications and physical can set us up for a lot of physical issues. So this is important.
Does knowing the consequences actually alter or change a person's behavior? Knowing that maybe my marriage might be falling apart or I might lose my job?
Isn't that interesting? You can tell a person, look, you're going to lose your spouse, or you're have some serious health issues, and they continue in the addiction. We've seen this before. We've seen the person that continues to smoke, for example, and they have serious health consequences. Oh, so knowing the consequences, interestingly, with an addiction, usually doesn't stop the behavior.
You know, I had a woman who had a tracheotomy in her neck, come to our school in elementary school, heavy chain smoker. She had a really rough voice. She took the cigarette into her neck, in through the hole, took a drag, a puff of the cigarette, and says, kids don't do drugs. And that's what scared me straight. No smoking for
Yeah.
this guy. That really, let's talk about the pain though, experienced by loved ones, those we really care about, and we want to help those who are addicted. How can we help those?
Well, it's a very awkward position for a loved one because one is you may have fallen into this enabling unintentionally. Sometimes we can enable. We all have somebody in our life that we love so much we'd do anything for them. And sometimes it's the addict in our life. And you go, I know I shouldn't have given him money. And you did. Or, but you want to do everything you can. And it's really hard to say no to the addict. So the addict can take us on a roller coaster. So one of the things that you got to do if you're a loved one is there is something called tough love. And I love you so much that, and fill in the blank that I'm going to say no. I love you so much that you have to get help. There's a point of intervention. There's a point that we need to step in as a loved one. And that's real love.
Now, why do you say that addiction really sets the agenda? You suggest that recovery from addiction is not just a single choice, but a journey. I know my members of my family that quit smoking. It took them 6, 7 times before they're finally able to quit.
And that's such a good point. I'm glad you make that point because it takes an average. We used to read 7 times for an alcoholic to go through recovery before they do it. And you go, wow, that sounds like a lot. Do I think it has to take 7 times? No. In our experience, as folks come to see us, they've usually tried a couple times. I think it's how we approach it. We've got to approach it from a whole person vantage point. We've got to help support their body physically. If their brain chemistry is off, their nutrients are off, we need to help the body that way. We've got to find a reason for them to recover. We've got to repair and restore relationships where we can. We've got to rebuild their health. Maybe, usually an addict doesn't have very good nutrition habits. So they got to start taking better care of themselves. Then there's the spiritual side that they may feel that no way God could ever love me for how I've lived. So we've got to address all those pieces. And I think that's where the real success comes.
And I know families as well and couples who've had Christian counseling and really helped save their marriage as well, bringing in the spiritual side and making God the focus of that marriage.
Yes. And I do want to add, I believe, and we do surveys with those that we've worked with, and they will say, 6 months or a year later, everything I learned there at the Center, A Place of Hope, is great, but it's been my faith that's kept me on the road. So, so a client will say, yeah, ultimately it's my faith that's kept me sober.
Amen to that. Now, before I let you go, Doctor, any advice about boundaries for a person living with an addicted family member? We talked about how we can kind of support an addict. What else can we do?
Well, I think boundaries is something we've got to keep working on because it's easy to get sucked into the dysfunction of an addiction. So, boundaries means I probably need to get some support if I am working with a person who's struggling with addiction. I need support and I need somebody that's helping me think clear. So, don't do this alone. Whether you're the addict or the one living with the addict, get some help. I mean, there's some wonderful faith-based groups that can also be of support because you need somebody telling you the truth as well.
That's right. One of my family members actually battled alcoholism for many years, about 30 years. And what I learned by going to Al-Anon, which is
Yes.
a division of AA, was never to tell that person, you have a problem. Because then
Yeah.
the walls go up, right? The defense mechanisms, they don't want to talk
Yeah.
to you. But say, do you love me? Ask them that question. They say, of course I love you. I have a problem. Can you help me with with my problem? They say, sure.
Yeah.
I have a problem with your drinking. Please help
Yeah.
me. And that made a world of difference. I'll always remember that.
Yeah. And that's a wonderful way to put it. I'm so glad you mentioned that.
Dr. Gregg Jantz, psychologist and author of Healing the Scars of Addiction. Thanks a lot for joining me today from Seattle, Washington.
Good to be with you.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great day.